Looking at Malawi's elections, the outcome, as you heard my colleague there, George, say that 85-year-old Peter Mutharika is the president-elect at 85 years old, and along with his deputy president. And also, George mentioning that Peter Mutharika is the brother of former Malawian President Bingu Mutharika. So these are some of the issues that we're going to tackle. We're looking at the fact that Peter Mutharika, 85-year-old, is taking over from Lazarus Chakwera, who himself was 70 years old. And we're asking this question in a nation with a median age of under 18, two septuagenarians and octogenarian candidates battling for the highest office, painting a very stark picture of the generational gulf in African politics at large. We speak about this, the gerontocracy being entrenched, to Samson Itodo, co-founder of Not Too Young to Lead in Nigeria. And we want to hear his organization's point of view, what they've done in Nigeria and what his views are. Samson, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us. First, if you could just give us
Thanks for having me.
A brief understanding of how your movement is pushing for youth representativity at grassroots level, and if you could just then mirror what is happening in Malawi, and your thoughts about the fact that Peter Mutharika at 85 is now going to lead Malawi.
Yeah, so we've got an African continent that is dominated by young people, and the continent is considered young because the median age is about 19. And this is a continent that has majority of its population, dominated by young people. Unfortunately, these young people, are a political minority, and they've been ruled consistently by septuagenarians. So it is an anomaly. And it is really troublesome that the average age of African leaders is about 65. So it leaves us really wondering whether young people are making their numbers count, or young people are voting more for older people. What it does suggest are three things. That one, the entire political process have been captured by political elites, and they continue to recycle themselves in office. A case in point is Malawian case, where you have Mutharika at 85. For heaven's sake, at 85, you should be chilling with your grandchildren, providing advice to leaders and acting as an elder statesman, especially for a country that it has a very young population. So this capture of the political process is one of the things and the trends that we see across board. Yes, there may be outliers, like a place like Senegal, where you have Faye, who is 44 as at when he contested and ran for office. That's an outlier. But you look across board, look at countries like Cameroon, look at countries like Uganda. Just a few moments ago, President Museveni was cleared to contest, and he's going to spend perhaps over 4 decades in public office. So that's something you need to deal with. The second is the cost of politics. And that the cost of politics is so high because you have elites that have plundered state resources, primitively accumulated wealth, and then ensured that economic inequality is deeply entrenched in the system. It makes it difficult for young people, women, and persons with disability to even aspire to run, because when you look at the cost, either to secure party nomination, to a large extent, they are very disempowered. So first, the foundation and the level playing field, it's not equal. And thirdly, it's just the fact that we've got a political process that does not have actors that uphold the principles of democracy. When you look at the quality of some of those elections, you clearly see that they don't meet the integrity test. Because if you have a young person in a free, credible, and transparent elections who have the opportunity to contest, they are able to mobilize their peers, to secure political power. So these are some of the trends that we see across board. And I think that, yes, there may be outliers in places like Botswana, places like Senegal, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done in 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 breaking the stronghold of old expired politicians that don't want to leave public office. And I wish that their insistence of securing political power is to put food on our table, is to provide security and ensure that we all have access to quality healthcare.
Now, let me come in here. Let me come in here, Sam. You mentioned obviously the dangers and obviously the negative effects of having this continual gerontocracy. But I want to look at the constitutional aspect of it. There's a minimum age for people to contest elections. Why is there so much silence on a maximum age? Should there, and is it feasible? Is it enforceable to say that there must be a maximum age for somebody who's running for elections? Out of the best interest of a country, we need somebody who's fit for purpose, one, who is also relevant in terms of the demographic that they're leading and their needs.
Well, from a rights perspective, I don't think that we should have laws that criminalizes or limits, political aspiration. That's not the entire notion of suffrage and the right to be voted and to vote and the right to be voted for. So from a human rights perspective, I wouldn't subscribe to proposals that you have thresholds for people to higher thresholds for people, and once they attain that age, they cannot run for office. I think what we need to do is to look at the political process. How are we encouraging younger people to get into politics? What spaces are we creating for them? How are we mobilizing people to stop voting for old politicians? When you look at what happened in Malawi, I think the next couple of months will give us opportunity to really interrogate whether the majority of the voters who chose Mutharika did so because they believe in his leadership capacity, or it was just Mutharika is nothing but a beneficiary of protest votes because of the anger that voters had with the Lazarus Chakwera's administration. So we've got to mobilize more people to think differently about who they vote for and parties that they vote for. But you cannot have these transitions if you don't have political parties that uphold the tenets of democracy and internal democracy within the parties. How are candidates nominated? Is it a question of the highest bidder and the highest spender? These are the bigger questions that we should be having. But I think that when people get to a certain age, it's just honorable when you become an elder statesman, take a back seat, allow younger people who have the stamina, who have the agility, who have the resilience, the innovation to lead, and don't subject your country to another term, of stunted growth when younger people would have done transformative stuff if given the opportunity.
You mentioned earlier on the cost of being recognized as eligible as a representative to contest elections. There's also the issue, you spoke about candidates who should be honorable enough to stand back, but let's face it, patronage begets or corruption begets patronage because there is this story that we're sold that with age comes experience and wisdom, and clearly we're not seeing a lot of that, particularly in terms of the high levels of corruption. What is the African Youth Charter then for? Shouldn't activists be doing more work to convince the electorate that not necessarily that you have to vote for somebody who looks like you, but who serves your purpose?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I totally agree with you that there's a great need of political socialization, that we need to make huge investments. And it's helping people make informed choices when they go to cast their votes. That when you think about the choices that voters make, it shouldn't be driven by emotions. It should be driven by, informed choices that are based on your knowledge and your understanding of the competence of that particular individual. That is one. So you need that level of socialization. Secondly, I think that there's also a dimension to this where people want to die in public office because they don't see, what life looks like out of power. And this is at the heart of our problem because the likes of Paul Biya has been in power for all his life, and he doesn't think that there is life after office. We've got to demonstrate to those folks that there is life after office. And the way to do that is the likes of the African Union, the likes of regional bodies to create programs where these people can transition to. This is a continent where we continue to grapple, with transition all the time because people don't think that there's life after office. Maybe because they want to stay in office so that they can use political power to protect themselves. Because most of them have been involved in all forms of corruption, human rights violations, and they want to escape accountability. It then behoves on we, the people, to resist that. The same way voters in Botswana, the same way voters in Senegal, the same way voters in Liberia, the same way voters in Ghana, did. So it's about mobilization because the contest for power in the public space, it's not a tea party. It takes a lot of organizing, doing so over a period of time. So these things are not going to come to us by just sitting down in boardrooms. It's going to take organizing at the grassroots, at every level, getting people to see why they need to do things differently.
Samson,
and these things reflect to their political choices.
Just as a final question, and I'm talking about the legality of what we're seeing in a lot of African countries, these dynastic governments rather. Is that legal, A? And what is the role of regional bodies when you say there needs to be stronger mobilization? And surely there must be some adherence to regional protocols where there's this entrenchment of elitism of leaders. How legal are these dynastic rulers that we keep seeing time and again on the African continent?
I think the regional bodies have a critical role to play. Unfortunately, they've been reactive rather than proactive. When political leaders perpetuate themselves in office, change constitution, refuse to abide by the wheel of choices made at the vote, change election results, capture electoral commissions, the regional institutions don't hold them to account to the norms and standards. It is when people decide to protest and try to resist, and then the state begins to kill its own citizens, that they rise up. And so our regional communities need to be proactive in ensuring that they hold our elected leaders to the commitments that they made in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, or the ACDEC, the African Charter on Elections and Governance. That's one role they have to play. The second point is, these things about introducing and imposing sanctions. Those mechanisms are mechanisms of control. And I think that they've got to activate them time, because when dialogue fails, you need to wield the big stick, especially if these countries have subscribed, to certain authority of these regional bodies. And then thirdly, I think the regional bodies like the AU, like SADC, and all the others would need to invest in supporting media, civil society organizations to promote democratic and democratic culture. And only then can we say that these regional institutions are institutions for the people, and they are not existing as a club of presidents or former presidents, because currently it does appear that they are pretty much the club of heads of state, and it's what the heads of states of these countries actually say and determine that we all have to rally around, which is not the case. It's time for our regional communities to be proactive in defending democracy, even though it will cost them their jobs.
And that's a good note to end it on. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Really appreciate it. Samson Itodo.
Thanks, always a delight.
A constitutional a lawyer, including a co-founder of Not Too Young to Lead. It's a movement in Nigeria that really works at the grassroots to encourage youth leadership. Nigeria has a number of those senators, governors, and he's pointed to other country examples that do that observe that principle of bringing into the fold younger leadership. And that brings the time to just about 30 minutes past 9 as we were reflecting the official announcement of 85-year-old Peter Mutharika as the new president-elect for Malawi.